This is the 2019 Mercedes AMG GT 4-door, and it is the coolest new sedan on sale. Now, Mercedes doesn't call it a sedan. This is the 4-door version of the Mercedes AMG GT Coupe, but Mercedes also calls this a coupe, so technically the name is the Mercedes AMG GT 4-door. Whatever. Anyway, the facts are these. This car has 630 horsepower. It costs over $150,000, and here it is. And today, I'm going to review it. I've borrowed this AMG GT 4-door from Fletcher Jones Motor Cars, which is the Mercedes-Benz dealership here in Orange County, California, Newport Beach. They're the largest Mercedes-Benz dealership in the country, and they get the newest and the first of everything, including the AMG GT 4-door. This is the Edition 1 model, and it's about to go on sale. So here's a brief overview of this car. As you know, Mercedes makes the AMG GT, which is a little two-door coupe or convertible that everyone seems to like. Well, this is the 4-door version of that, and it's offered in two versions. There is the regular AMG GT 63 4-door, which has 577 horsepower. Then there's this, the AMG GT 63S 4-door, which has 630 horsepower. Apparently an entry-level model is coming later in the year. Now, both of these versions come standard with all-wheel drive. The starting price for the regular AMG GT 63 is around $136,000, whereas the AMG GT 63S will be starting from around $160,000. That's an enormous amount of money, considering that the 617 horsepower BMW M5 competition starts from around $112,000, but the 680 horsepower Porsche Panamera Turbo starts at over $160,000. Plus, Mercedes-Benz would argue that the M5 is just a 5 Series sedan that's been turned into a performance car, whereas this is a performance car that's been turned into a sedan. Coupe, hatchback thing, whatever. Interestingly, this car doesn't sit on the same platform as the Mercedes AMG GT Coupe, but rather a modified version of the platform that's underneath the CLS and the Mercedes E-Class. Speaking of the CLS, that's Mercedes' other 4-door coupe, and I recently reviewed that. I'll link that video in the description below, and I'm curious to see where this differs. So today we're going to find out. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the GT63S 4-door, and I'm going to show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on this car, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the most expensive Mercedes-Benz models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the AMG GT 63S 4-door with the buttons in the interior. Now, this car has buttons just like you have in your car, but this car's buttons are better than your buttons. I'm going to start with the ones in the center control stack, and the reason why I say they're better is because they're interactive button screen things. Take a look at this. In the upper left of the center control stack, you have this little switch, and that changes around the drive mode that you're in. You can see the little screen next to the switch actually changes when you move between the drive modes, and it gets better. Go below that, and you can choose between manual or automatic mode for the transmission, and as you press this little interactive button, it actually changes what it's displaying, which is really cool. Next, you have suspension, and once again, you can press this interactive button and it shows in real time what suspension you're in, so you don't have to look at the infotainment screen or the gauge cluster. It's actually showing right there on the button screen. The last button over on the left side of the center control stack is the one that adjusts the traction control. You press that to turn on or off the traction control. Now, next up, we move over to the right side of the center control stack, and you see at the top another little dial that adjusts the volume for the stereo, and you can see that as you adjust the volume, it shows the current volume on this little screen next to this dial. Of course, it also shows this to you in the infotainment screen, but you can also look to this little dial control. The other interactive buttons on the right side of the center control stack are also interesting. The next one down turns on or off auto start stop, the system that turns the car off at traffic lights to save fuel, and the one down from that adjusts the exhaust. You can have it in regular exhaust mode, or you can press that, put it in sport exhaust, and then it is displayed there that sport exhaust is active. Now you have a fourth button on this right side, and that one is blank. Doesn't have any function. Unbelievably, Mercedes manages to create blank switches and buttons even when the buttons are these interactive screen things. It's incredible to me. You can never buy a German luxury car without blanks, but the rest of the buttons are pretty cool. And it extends to the steering wheel. Now, on the right side of the steering wheel, you can see you have this little dial, and once again, this is a screen. You turn it and it adjusts the drive mode, and it shows your current drive mode on this little screen in the middle of the dial that you turn, which is cool. And on the left, also very cool, you have another screen and two separate buttons. With these, you can adjust the current suspension setting and the traction control. You can toggle it on or off. So you have a bunch of buttons and switches in this car that are cooler, more interesting, more interactive than your typical buttons and switches. Now, speaking of interesting buttons and switches in this car, next I want to talk about the hazard light button, which is in the middle like it is in most cars, but in this one it is tremendously small. Look how tiny that is compared to my finger. It's the smallest hazard light button I've ever seen in any car. It's like a little toy hazard light button. Now, another very cool button setup in this car is what is around the button for the hazard lights. All right, so check this out. This car has this big giant screen set up here, the gauge cluster screen and the infotainment. They're just huge, and they're not touch screens. In some other Mercedes-Benz models they are, but in this vehicle, if you want to control that center screen, you have to use the steering wheel or this little control pad in the middle. Now, I'm a little disappointed there's no touch screen, but Mercedes has a great alternative. This little electronic panel around the hazard lights is like a physical home screen for the infotainment system. So you don't actually have to go to the home screen and take multiple steps every time you're looking for something. Instead, you just run your fingers over the panel and select, for example, navigation when it pops up, and you're there instantly. This panel functions like a shortcut home screen, and it's a brilliant idea that I hope everybody adopts in their cars soon. Now, next up, before I move into the infotainment system, I want to talk about a couple of other things in this interior, and I want to start with the ambient lighting. Now, ambient lighting keeps getting more and more interesting in modern cars, but this vehicle has a particularly unusual one. It has ambient light circles inside the climate control vents. You can see them if I cut my hand over them. Whatever ambient light color you have is displayed right there. And of course, it's in addition to the ambient lights in the door panels, the ceiling, and all that stuff. Now, next up, another item with this interior. It is absolutely beautiful. A gorgeous place to spend time. All the materials are fantastic. Carbon fiber stitching, everything feels really good, although it better considering the base price of the 63S is $160,000. I especially like this little unbroken silver line that starts in the dashboard and goes on to the door panel, and this little unbroken line of yellow stitching that does the same thing, goes from the door panel to the dashboard. But everything in this interior is really, really beautiful, as expected given the price point. Now, next up, another item I like in this car. In a lot of vehicles, in the ceiling next to the rear view mirror, you have a sunglasses holder that drops from the ceiling. Not in this car, you have a speaker. And it's the same story in the middle. A lot of cars have a dome light in the middle of the interior on the ceiling. No, not in this car. You have another speaker. This car has the optional Burmester sound system, which costs $4,500 extra. And the result of that is Mercedes-Benz has filled this interior with speakers to provide you with the finest sound experience possible. Now, next we move on to the infotainment system and some of the technology this car has. Again, I'm a little disappointed the infotainment system isn't a touch screen, but when you start getting into some of this car's amazing features, you forget about that a little bit. One of those features is something called energizing comfort. Now, in your car, you want to be a little cooler, you turn on the climate control and make yourself cool. Fine. In this car, energizing comfort doesn't just turn on the climate control, but rather it provides an experience. So, for example, the refresh setting in here offers green-blue lighting and a cool, refreshing breeze to whisk you away to the seaside. And if you set it to that, not only does it blow out a cool breeze from the climate vents, but it also changes the ambient lighting to match that seaside cool breeze of the refresh setting. So basically, it tailors several different vehicle functions to provide you with a specific experience that goes beyond just setting the climate control temperature. But the best part of the energizing comfort section of the infotainment system is the training portion. Check this out. You can actually set the car to provide you with muscle exercises while you drive down the road. And you can choose between muscle relaxation and muscle stimulation. If you choose stimulation, it goes through a series of 11 different exercises you can do, pushing up against the seat, straightening your back, etc., so you can actively exercise through a program in the infotainment system of your car as you drive down the road.
And mostly, later when I drove this car, I attempted to do a workout as I drove down the street, but in fact the car must be in park for this feature to work. I guess it's designed for rest stops on long drives to help you stay loose and keep active.
Another amazing feature of the infotainment system is all of the seat adjustments it can make. On your door panel, you can move the seat forward, backward, up, down. You can do all the usual stuff, but there are so many additional options in the infotainment system. Check out, for example, this lateral cushion adjustment. You can dial it from 0 to 10, and when you do that, watch how the seat bolsters immediately change to provide less lateral cushion adjustment to grip you in place better. Go back down to 0 and the bolsters immediately do their thing and go back to give you a little bit more room. Really impressive to see. Another really impressive feature in this car is that it has a fragrance. Yes, that's right. You don't just have climate control, but you can turn on a fragrance in the infotainment system, and then the climate control will blow out both air and the fragrance to make your interior smell a little bit nicer. Now, unfortunately, this car does not have the fragrance canister, so I can't sit here filming this video and smelling all the wonderful smells. But Mercedes-Benz sells it through their dealers. You buy it, you stick it into this area in the glove box, and then it syncs up with the climate controls, and if you turn on the fragrance, it will blow a fragrance out as you drive down the road. Now, next up, moving on to the steering wheel, another item worth noting, something I've complained about in Mercedes-Benz models for years, is that there is no next track button on the steering wheel, so you can just tap the wheel and go to the next track. Well, Mercedes now offers this incredible steering wheel with all these functions. It's beautiful, it's Alcantara, it's perfect in every way, except there is still no next track button. You can highlight the music selection, scroll over to it, click next track, but it's still a process. You can't just do it with the push of one button. Now, it is worth noting that Mercedes-Benz has stuck a next track button in the center controls above the touchpad, so you can go to the next track fairly easily, although there's no previous track button here. So if you want to go back a track, well, that's just too bad. I guess you'll have to go into the infotainment system, the music player, or actually find the previous track button and click on it using the touchpad. There's no shortcut button. But anyway, speaking of the steering wheel, forget about the next track button. But I want to talk about the gauge cluster because that is really the most impressive part. The gauge cluster in this car is incredibly configurable, more so than basically any other brand. And you have 3 different parts of the gauge cluster. One is the speedometer, which is fixed, but otherwise you can change the rest of the gauge cluster to show whatever it is that you want. Your trip odometer,